63 applicants stood in the glass lobby of Halcyon Aerospace, every one of them dressed in black, polished, prepared. Then the door turned and he walked in, wrinkled gray flannel, faded khaki pants. A 6-year-old girl beside him, her left hand in his, her right hand wrapped around a small aluminum airplane painted a strange shade of deep blue. The laughter came almost immediately. Someone in the line of applicants said it looked like a preschool drop-off. Evelyn Marsh did not slow down when she crossed the lobby. She walked past him the way people walk past furniture. She looked at the temporary badge clipped to his shirt. Then she looked at the man. Then she looked back at the badge, as if the badge had been mistaken. She did not wait for him to speak. She had already pulled her phone from her pocket. She said it loud enough to carry. "This is not a preschool drop-off. The service entrance is on the east side of the building. Someone over there will help you." She did not look at the little girl. She did not look at the airplane in the little girl's hand. She did not look at the door behind him, where the morning light was falling through the glass in the exact angle that had been calculated in a load-bearing proposal submitted under his name 11 years earlier. He did not turn around right away. He crouched down to his daughter's level, said something too quiet for anyone else to hear. She nodded once. That was enough. The only person in the lobby who already knew how this morning would end was 6 years old. She was sitting on her father's knee with both hands around a small bell-painted airplane. She was not looking at the crowd. She was watching her father's face the way children watch when they are deciding whether something is safe. She had decided it was. In the corner of her airplane's left wing, 2 letters had been scratched into the aluminum with the point of a drawing compass. M and H. Down on the floor below them, in a hangar that was running 14 hours past its deadline, the engine those letters had once been written on top of was already failing. She had not read the badge properly. That was the first mistake. Stay with this story. Levi Harmon was 39 years old. His badge said Contract Maintenance, Level 2, Night Shift. That was the most honest thing on it. He worked from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, cleaning the corridors and replacing fluorescent panels on the upper floors of Halcyon Aerospace headquarters in Renton, Washington. He had been doing it for 14 months. Nobody on the engineering floor had ever asked his last name. He preferred it that way. The apartment was small. Small the way things are when someone has made a deliberate choice about what they were willing to carry, and had decided that most of it was not worth the wait. The kitchen counter held exactly 2 mugs. One for him, one for his daughter. The bookshelf held technical manuals, not novels. Above the small couch in the living room, framed behind glass, was a single pencil drawing of an engine cross-section. He had moved a photograph of his daughter in front of it so that the signature at the bottom of the page could no longer be read. He had done that the first week they moved in. His daughter was named Mia. She was 6 years old. She had brown hair that she refused to let him cut shorter than her shoulders. She read 3 grade levels above her own and would not eat anything green except cucumbers. She carried a small airplane wherever she went. It was the size of her hand. The body was cast from scraps of aluminum her father had brought home from the machine shop floor across 2 autumns when she was 4. The wings could be removed and put back on. The tail fin had 2 letters scratched into it with the point of a drawing compass. She had named it Glider. Glider had been painted a deep blue that did not match any color in any commercial catalog because her father had mixed it himself. On a Sunday afternoon, in the kitchen sank 2 industrial paint tins because no available color had been exactly right. She called it Mia Blue. She did not know that 3 months after he had mixed it, the same shade had been entered into the official Halcyon livery specification for the HX-9 fleet under the registration number she could not pronounce. She knew only that it was hers. That morning had begun the way all his mornings began. 6:45, warm milk and a slice of toast at the small kitchen table, Mia telling him a long story about Glider's adventures the day before, as if Glider had a life of his own. 7:10, walking her down the hall to Mrs. Henley's door, where Mrs. Henley watched her on the days her school was closed. Mrs. Henley had not opened the door. She had a fever. She apologized through the wood. Levi had stood in the hall for a moment, with Mia's hand in his, and made the decision quickly, the way he made most decisions now. He had a stop to make at headquarters at the end of his shift. He would bring her with him. He would leave her in the contract workers' break room on level B2 with a coloring book and glider while he turned in his paperwork. It would take 15 minutes. She would be fine. That was the plan. Above the drawing on the living room wall, behind the photograph of his daughter at 4 years old, was a signature. It read L. Harmon, March 14, 2014. That was the morning the line of his old life had stopped being a line and become something he would rather not look at directly. His wife Sarah had been alive for 6 years after that date. She had died in May of 2020 from pancreatic cancer that had been found in February and had not negotiated. Mia had been 1 year old. He had stopped going to the office 2 months later. He had not given a reason. He had simply left. For 3 years, he had drawn freelance technical illustrations for small machine shops up and down the coast. He had learned how to braid his daughter's hair without making her cry. He had learned that the part of himself that had once needed to be looked at had died beside Sarah, and that he was not, in fact, mourning its absence. When he applied for the night maintenance contract at Halcyon the previous year, he had used his middle name on the resume and a P.O. box for his address. Nobody in human resources had recognized him. Engineers age out of memory quickly in a company that runs on the next product. He had counted on that. He had been right. He had walked back into the building he had spent 6 years inside without anybody noticing he had ever been there before. That was, in its way, the cleanest thing about the whole arrangement. Before I tell you what happened when Werner Halbach walked into that hangar at 6 minutes past 9 in the morning, tell me where you are listening from today and whether anyone in your life has ever dismissed someone before learning who they really were. Drop it in the comments. Stay with me until the end. Halcyon Aerospace was the 4th largest commercial engine manufacturer in the world. Its campus sat in Renton, Washington, 15 minutes south of Seattle, along the western shoulder of Lake Washington, on a piece of industrial flatland where the airfield ran almost up to the lobby doors. The company employed 4,700 people in Renton alone. 64% of its revenue came from a single product line, the HX9 family of turbofan engines. It powered 3 of the most profitable commercial airframes in current production. Every airline in the world that had bought an HX9 had eventually bought another one. The engine was, as Werner Halbach had once written in a memorandum to his board in Frankfurt, the cleanest piece of engineering he had reviewed in 20 years. Werner Halbach had read that engineering review in the spring of 2017. The cover page had carried the name of the lead design engineer. Werner had asked, on more than one occasion, across the 17 years that followed, to meet the man who had written it. He had been told, politely, that the engineer in question had taken extended personal leave. He had stopped asking after the 2nd year. He had not stopped wondering. Evelyn Marsh had been Chief Executive Officer of Halcyon Aerospace for 4 months. She was 36 years old. She was the youngest chief executive in the company's 41-year history, and she carried the title the way some people carried a knife. She had taken her undergraduate degree at Ohio State and her MBA at Wharton on a scholarship she did not like to be reminded of. The board had hired her because she had been described to them as someone who would make the hard calls without sentiment. She had cut the contract maintenance budget by 18% the week before this one. A memo had crossed her desk that morning, recommending the dismissal of the entire overnight cleaning crew on Friday. She had signed it. Her mother had been a cleaning woman in Cleveland for 31 years. She had not told anyone at Halcyon this. She had not told anyone at Wharton either. She had decided, somewhere between her 2nd and 3rd year of business school, that the only way to never again be looked at the way her mother had been looked at was to be the one doing the looking. She had told herself every morning since that day a single sentence in the mirror. Decide first. Don't let them decide for you. She had said it that morning at 5:45. She had said it again in the elevator at 7:38. She had been thinking about the Lufthansa contract when the man in the gray flannel walked through the front doors of the lobby with a child holding an airplane. She had decided in the time it took her to cross 15 feet of marble that he was a problem she could afford to dismiss in under 30 minutes. She had been wrong about him in every way that mattered. She did not yet know that. Cameron Webb had been Chief Operating Officer of Halcyon Aerospace for 19 years. He was 58 years old. He had been the man passed over when Evelyn was appointed. He had not protested. He had smiled. He had congratulated her, and he had begun, with the patience of a man who had outlasted 3 executives before her, to teach her how things were done. His lessons always sounded like wisdom. He told her which suppliers were worth keeping and which were worth replacing. He told her that the contract maintenance crew was a sentimental holdover from an older era of the company, and that the cost line could not be defended at the next quarterly review. He spoke often of standards, of appearances, of the line between those who built the engines and those who merely swept around them. Evelyn, who had spent her childhood on the wrong side of every such line, absorbed his words like a convert. She did not notice how neatly they fit the shape of her oldest fear. Cameron had signed the paperwork on Levi Harmon's departure himself in July of 2020. He had watched Levi walk out and had felt, in the quiet of his own office afterward, a small uncomfortable relief. Levi had been the only engineer the board had treated like an equal. He had been the only engineer Werner Halbach had ever asked for by name. When Levi left, 3 of the auxiliary design files for the HX-9 had been quietly reassigned to the names of 2 engineers who reported directly to Cameron. The original signatures had been redacted. The new names appeared on every print run that followed. He had simply allowed the record to drift. That was the version Werner Halbach had received ever since. That was the version about to become a problem. The HX-9R demo had been scheduled for that morning, the 9th of the month at 9 sharp. It was a routine certification flight for the new cold-weather variant of the engine, witnessed by a senior delegation from Lufthansa Technik in Frankfurt, ahead of the renewal of a service contract worth $3.2 billion across the next 7 years. Werner Halbach had flown in from Frankfurt the previous evening. He had been in the country 11 hours when the trouble started. At 5:30 the previous evening, the engineering team running the cold-soak chamber test had recorded an unexpected vibration signature in the W16 fuel system at 22 degrees below 0 Celsius. The signature did not match anything in the current diagnostic library. The team had worked through the night. By 7:30 in the morning, they were 14 hours past the start of the test cycle, and they had not found the cause. Werner Halbach was sitting in a conference room on the 12th floor with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. He was a patient man. He was also 70 years old and had crossed the Atlantic the day before. The patience was thinning. Evelyn had been informed of the vibration issue at 6:15. She had been assured by Cameron that the engineering team would have it solved before the delegation arrived at the floor. She had chosen to believe him. She had chosen that because the alternative was a different morning entirely, and she could not afford a different morning. She had walked into the lobby at 7:43 to greet the photographers and the press contact for the trade journal that would cover the contract signing. She had walked past the man in the gray flannel at 7:44. She had told him to use the service entrance at 7:44 and 20 seconds. At 7:58, while she was making polite conversation with a reporter on the upper concourse, Levi Harmon had crossed the lower level of the building and had stopped at the small interior window of the cold-soak chamber on his way to the contract maintenance office. He had glanced at the monitor on the wall outside the chamber. He had looked at it for 11 seconds. He had understood in those 11 seconds with the kind of certainty that arrives only when you yourself have written the line of code being violated, what was wrong. He had stood there for another 6 seconds. Then he had taken his daughter by the hand and led her down the hallway to the break room on level B2. He had sat her at the small round table in the corner. He had pulled a coloring book out of his bag and put a small box of crayons next to it. He had crouched down to her level and said something quietly. Sarah had said it to him once. "You designed it to take people places. Don't let them break what you made." He had not been able to forget that. He did not try. Mia looked at him for a long moment. She held Glider tighter against her chest. She nodded. She did not ask where he was going. She had decided his face was safe a long time ago, and she did not need to ask again. He stood up. He kissed the top of her head. He walked out of the break room. He walked of the break room and turned left toward the freight elevator, the one that led down to the test floor. He took the standard maintenance kit from the locker at the end of the hall on his way past. He took, from the very bottom of the locker, a roll of paper wrapped in a brown rubber band that he had placed there on his first day at Halcyon 14 months earlier, and had not touched since. He held the roll in his left hand as he stepped into the elevator. He did not look at it. He already knew what was on it. The cold-soaked chamber sat on the south end of the test floor, behind a glass observation wall and a set of steel doors that locked from the inside during a run. 4 engineers were around the chamber when Levi stepped in. 2 of them were holding diagnostic tablets. 1 of them was on his knees beside the access panel. None of them noticed Levi come through the side door because the side door was not part of the forgotten access protocol, and they had forgotten it existed. Levi had drawn that side door into the original blueprint of the test floor in the spring of 2015, because he had not liked the way the standard route forced a technician to cross in front of an open exhaust. He walked across the observation deck and looked at the diagnostic readout on the wall. He watched it for 8 seconds. He had seen enough. He turned and walked toward the access panel, where the engineer on his knees was working. He set the standard maintenance kit down on the floor beside the panel. He set the roll of paper on top of the kit. He did not announce himself. He crouched. He already knew. He had been waiting. The engineer on his knees was named Daniel Park. He was 28 years old. He had been at Halcyon for 3 years, and he was good at his job, in the way that people are good at jobs they have been trained for properly, without having yet had any reason to question. He looked up when Levi crouched beside him. He did not recognize him. He saw the contract maintenance badge. He said, "Evenly enough, you're not supposed to be in here." Levi did not look at him. He was looking at the access panel. "Don't touch the W16 valve," he said. "I'm not done." Daniel paused. Something in the way the man had said it made Daniel pause longer than he meant to. Not the words. The voice underneath the words. It was the voice of a person who knew exactly what was inside the panel and had not needed to look at the readout to know it. Daniel did not move. He did not call security. He sat back on his heels and watched. Levi opened the panel in a sequence that did not appear in any current maintenance protocol. He removed 3 brackets that the current protocol did not list as removable. He worked with the unhurried certainty of someone who had taken these panels off in his head 1,000 times before he had ever taken one off in real life. He did not check the diagnostic tablet on the floor. He did not consult the roll of paper next to his kit. He worked from memory. Not the uncertain memory of someone trying to recall. The memory of someone who had written it in the first place. The engineer at the back of the chamber, who had been standing with his arms folded for the last hour, took out his phone. He typed a message. He sent it to Cameron Webb on the executive floor. Cameron Webb read the message at 8:29. He stood up from his desk so quickly that his chair rolled back and struck the wall behind him. He took the executive elevator down to the test floor. He did not stop to put on his suit jacket. He came through the door of the cold-soaked chamber at 8:31. He saw Levi from behind first, the shape of the shoulders, the way the head was tilted, the set of the hands on the panel. He had known that shape every day of 6 years, and he had not seen it in 4. His face went white for approximately 2 seconds. Then he recovered. He crossed the floor. He said, "Get out. Security is on its way." Levi did not look up. "Then they'll find me here," he said. "I'm still working." Cameron stood 3 feet behind him. He could have called security in earnest. He had not, in fact, called them yet. He had the phone in his hand and he had not dialed. He understood very quickly, with the cold clarity of a man who had survived 19 years inside a building, by reading rooms correctly, that he had a problem with no clean solution. If Levi was right about the W-16 fuel system, and Levi was always right about the W-16 fuel system, and if Evelyn ever discovered that Cameron had stopped Levi from making the fix before the Lufthansa delegation arrived, his career at Halcyon ended in the time it took the chairman to sign a single page. If Levi was wrong, security could remove him in 5 minutes and the matter could be reframed as the unfortunate incident of an unstable former employee. Cameron did not believe Levi was wrong. He stood there. He did not move. He did not dial. The phone stayed in his hand. That was the first consent he had not intended to give. Cameron did not move. Levi worked for another 14 minutes without speaking. At 8:48 he stopped. He sat back on his heels. He looked at one specific line on the diagnostic tablet on the floor, which he had not touched until that moment, and he confirmed for himself what he had already known. The vibration was not in the engine. The engine was perfect. The vibration was in the fuel injection sequence written into the W-16 firmware. Somebody had updated the firmware in 2022 without understanding the original logic. At 22 degrees below 0 Celsius, the new sequence allowed fuel atomization to fail for 0.3 of a second on initial ignition. 0.3 of a second was enough. He took a small notebook out of his hip pocket. He wrote 4 lines of code on a clean page. He tore the page out. He held it out to Daniel Park. "Type this in," he said. "Line 847 of the W-16 firmware. Save it. Reboot the chamber." Daniel took the page. He looked at the 4 lines. He looked at Levi. He could have refused. He did not refuse. There was something in the handwriting on the page. He had seen handwriting like that on the inside of the firmware vault, in the margins of original design documents he was not supposed to read. He had read them anyway, 2 years earlier, on a quiet weekend. He stood up. He walked to the firmware terminal. He typed in the 4 lines. He saved. He rebooted. At 9:02 in the morning, the cold-soak chamber's diagnostic display rolled through its restart sequence and came back online. The W-16 vibration signature dropped to 0. Every warning light in the chamber turned green. Daniel Park stood at the terminal and watched the readout for a full 30 seconds before he spoke, all green. Levi did not say anything. He gathered the small notebook from the floor. He gathered the standard maintenance kit. He left the roll of paper on top of the kit. He left the kit beside the panel. He stood up slowly. He felt every one of his 39 years in his knees. He turned and walked back across the observation deck, past Cameron, who had not moved, and out through the side door he had drawn into the building in the spring of 2015. He walked toward the break room on level B2. He walked toward his daughter. That was the only place he intended to be when the morning caught up with itself. Werner Halbach was on the upper concourse with Evelyn when Cameron called. Cameron did not call from the test floor. He called from a small office 2 doors away from it. He told Evelyn in the calm voice of a man who had practiced calm voices for a long time that the W-16 issue had been resolved and that the demo could proceed on schedule. He did not tell her how it had been resolved. He did not tell her who had resolved it. Evelyn felt the day shift back into its expected shape. She smiled at Werner. She said the engineering team had pulled through. Werner nodded politely. He had been told this kind of thing before. He had also been told, over the course of 17 years of working with Halcyon, that the engineering team had a way of pulling through that sounded slightly different depending on who was speaking, and that he had learned, with the patience of an older man who had seen many companies, that the truth often lived in the small variations. He said he would like to see the chamber before the formal demo flight. Evelyn said, of course. Cameron, on the phone 2 doors away, heard her say it. He did not have time to intercept the visit. He had 2 minutes to decide whether to walk into that chamber ahead of them or behind them. He chose behind. That was his second mistake of the morning. They came down the freight elevator at 9:15. Werner Halbach, Evelyn Marsh, a press attaché from the Trade Journal who was not supposed to be in the chamber but had been allowed in because Werner had not objected. Cameron Webb followed 3 steps behind. The 4 engineers were still in the chamber. Daniel Park was at the firmware terminal. The other 3 were standing around the engine bay, looking at the green riseouts as if they did not quite believe them. Werner walked the length of the chamber. He looked at the readout. He nodded once. He said, in his careful, precise English, "Where is the engineer who solved this?" The 3 engineers around the engine bay did not answer. Daniel Park at the terminal did not answer right away either. Then he raised one hand. He pointed across the chamber toward the corner near the side door, in the small alcove where a folding chair had been pushed against the toolbox storage shelves. Werner Halbach turned to look. Evelyn turned with him. In the alcove, on the folding chair, with her head tilted gently to one side against the side of the toolbox shelves, a 6-year-old girl was asleep. Glider sat upright in her lap, nose pointed at the ceiling. A gray flannel shirt was draped across her shoulders and tucked under her chin. On the second folding chair beside her, opened flat across the seat, was a roll of paper unrolled and weighted at the corners by 2 small metal washers. It was a hand-drawn cross-section of an engine. The cross-section was the original schematic of the HX9 design. In the lower right corner of the page was a signature, L. Harmon. The date written underneath the signature was March 14, 2014. Beside the chairs, standing very still with one hand resting on his daughter's small shoulder, was Levi Harmon. He was not looking at Werner. He was looking at Mia. She was safe now. The chamber was very quiet. Werner Halbach did not approach the chairs right away. He stood where he was. He looked at the sleeping child. He looked at the airplane in her lap. He looked at the gray flannel shirt across her shoulders. He looked finally at the roll of paper on the second chair. He crossed the chamber slowly. He stopped at the edge of the second chair. He bent down without making any sound. He looked at the signature in the lower right corner of the page for what felt like a long time. It was, in fact, 6 seconds. He straightened. He turned to face Evelyn Marsh. He spoke without raising his voice. "I read this analysis 17 years ago." He paused. "The version we received had a different name on it." Evelyn did not understand the sentence right away. She looked at Cameron. Cameron did not look back. Werner turned to face her fully. He spoke as if he were reading something off a page only he could see. "Levi Harmon designed the HX9, every line of it. I have been buying his work for 17 years. I have never met him. Until now." The chamber processed this at different speeds. The 3 engineers around the engine bay looked at each other. Then, they looked at the floor. Daniel Park, at the firmware terminal, set down his tablet very carefully on the counter beside him, as if he had only just realized he was still holding it. Nobody said anything for a long moment, not because they had nothing to say, because everything they could say would only make it worse. Nobody spoke. Werner did not turn to look at Cameron. He did not need to. He asked Evelyn quietly if he might see the full design documentation in the company vault before the demo flight proceeded. Evelyn said yes. She did not know what else to say. At 9:45, Werner Halbach was in the documentation vault on the 3rd floor with a halcyon archivist. The archivist pulled the original HX9 binder. The signature on the first page was L. Harmon. The signatures on the auxiliary W16 files were not. They were the names of 2 engineers who reported directly to Cameron Webb. The original signatures had been redacted. The dates of redaction were noted in the logbook. Werner closed the binder. He said, in his careful, precise English, that this would be considered fraud in the Federal Republic of Germany, and that he assumed there were also consequences for it in the United States. At 10:30 in the morning, Cameron Webb was escorted out of the building by halcyon security. His 19 years ended and took him to clear his desk. The board of directors opened a formal internal investigation before noon. The matter was referred to the company's outside for review under federal intellectual property statute by the end of the week. He did not perform reluctance now. He gathered his folder with hands that were not entirely steady. He walked out the front doors of the lobby, because the side door was no longer his to use. Mia woke up at 11:15. She did not understand what had happened in the chamber while she had been sleeping. She saw a number of strangers standing around. She saw her father sitting on the folding chair beside her, his hand still resting on her shoulder. She rubbed her eyes with the back of one wrist. She held Glider a little tighter against her chest. Werner Halbach approached her chair the way an older man approaches a small animal he does not want to startle. He crouched down to her level. He spoke to her in his careful accented English. "That is a very fine airplane." Mia looked at him seriously. She considered the statement. She said, "My dad made it. He makes the good ones." Werner smiled. It was small. It was the first time in the entire length of that long morning that his face had done that particular thing. He nodded once at her, the small formal nod of a man who had received an answer of substance, and he straightened. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Evelyn Marsh stood 5 meters away from the folding chair for what felt like a long time before she crossed the rest of the floor. She did not bring the press attaché with her. She did not bring the photographers from the upper concourse. She did not bring anyone. She stopped 2 feet from where Levi was sitting. She did not sit down. She did not put out a hand. She said quietly, in a voice that did not sound like the one she had used in the lobby that morning, "I owe you an apology. I am not going to ask you to accept it today. I came to say it because not saying it would be worse than you not accepting it." Levi looked at her. It was the first time he had looked at her face directly since 7:44 in the morning. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, "I accept that. That was all. No attached conditions, no performance of magnanimity. Just the plain closure of a man who did not need to make other people's accountability into a longer story than it needed to be." Evelyn nodded once. She did not cry. She did not try to extend the conversation. She turned to walk away. She stopped on her way past the folding chair. She looked at Glider in Mia's lap. She looked at the strange deep blue of the small painted body. She had seen that color almost every day for 4 months on the side of every HX-9 livery rendering in her own briefing decks. She had not asked, in those 4 months, who had mixed it. She had not asked anything about the engine at all that could not be answered with a number. She understood now, standing 2 feet from a sleeping girl's airplane, that she had been running a company she had not bothered to look at properly. She walked out of the chamber without saying anything else. She did not go to her office. She sat alone in the small employee garden on the 2nd floor for almost an hour. The Lufthansa contract was signed 3 days later on the original terms. Werner Halbach insisted on one addition. The lead design engineer on the HX-9 program would be correctly named in the engineering attribution. He did not ask Levi to attend the signing. He understood that Levi would not have come. 3 months later, on a clear, cold afternoon in February, the new HX-9R passed its final certification flight over the Cascades. Levi was not at the airfield to watch it. He was at Renton Elementary at 2:45 in the afternoon picking up his daughter. He had taken a part-time advisory contract with Halcyon Aerospace 2 weeks after the morning in the chamber. The contract was for 2 days a week. The contract specified that he would not be required to attend press events, that his name would not be used in external marketing, and that his hours would end no later than 2:30 in the afternoon. Every day school was in session. He still lived in the same one-bedroom apartment across the Cedar River. The pencil drawing on the wall was still there. The photograph of Mia at 4 years old was no longer in front of the signature. She had asked in November to see the name underneath. He had moved the photograph to the shelf beside it. She had read the name out loud once, carefully, and then she had asked if she could keep the drawing in her room when she got older. He had said yes. On a Saturday evening in February, Mia sat on the rug in the living room with a wooden box of pencils open beside her. She was drawing an airplane. It was not Glider. It was a real airplane. The wingspan was in proportion. The engine nacelles were in the correct position under the wings. She had drawn it from memory. Levi sat down on the rug beside her. He looked at the drawing for a while. He did not say anything, she said, without looking up, Dad. Can you teach me how to make the lines straight without a ruler? He said, yes. She said, tonight? He said, tonight. He stood up. He took a soft pencil out of the small wooden case on the shelf above the couch. It was a 2H drawing pencil. It was the pencil he had been holding the morning he had drawn the first cross-section of the HX9 in March 2014. He sat back down on the rug. He handed it to her. On the windowsill across the room, Glider sat with his nose pointed out toward the gray flat February sky over Renton. Nobody was holding him. He did not need to be held anymore. He had done his work. He had not come back to be recognized. He had come back because Mia would one day ask why he had stopped doing the thing he had loved. He wanted to have an answer for her that was not only about loss. The pencil moved across her paper that night, not the uncertain way of a child copying. The slow, deliberate way of someone learning a language her father had been writing in his sleep for 20 years. Some things wait. They do not become less true while they are waiting. They just wait. Looking back, the thing that changed everything that morning was not the engine. It was not the contract. It was a 6-year-old in the corner of a hangar holding an airplane made of scrap aluminum, refusing to look anywhere except at her father's face. The difference between value and worthlessness is often nothing more than the willingness to stop and look properly at something the rest of the world has walked past. Authority exercised without the willingness to listen is not strength. It is a specific and very costly kind of blindness. Some things cannot be taken. Not really. They can be buried under wrong names and bad decisions. But they stay where they are, underneath, patient, waiting to be called on. If you were in Levi's position, would you have spoken up the moment you were dismissed? Or would you have stayed silent and let the truth arrive on its own time? Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone. Our team works hard to create stories dramatic enough to entertain, but meaningful enough to leave a lasting message. Everything in this video is completely fictional and was created only to share meaningful lessons through an entertaining story. We hope it encourages you to value what is real, to look past the surface of the people around you, and never let a first impression write the final word on anyone's worth.